Hey guys, tonight we're stepping straight into the biting cold of an Imperial Russian winter, snow crunching underfoot, frost clinging to your eyelashes, and the wind howling like a wolf pack that skipped dinner. You push open a creaky wooden door and are hit with a wall of smoky heat and the savory promise of something bubbling away in a giant iron cauldron. It's cozy, sure, but let's be honest, you probably won't survive this without at least 3 layers of wool and a tolerance for cabbage that borders on heroic. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Feel free to drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing how far this sleepy little community stretches. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wipe your boots on the straw mat and step inside this humble wooden izba, the traditional Russian log house where winter is less a season and more a state of mind. It smells of pine smoke, boiled grain, and the tang of fermented vegetables. You're immediately grateful for the giant brick stove in the center of the room. It isn't just for cooking, it's for surviving. A whole family might sleep on top of it, their blankets spread across its toasty surface while the fire crackles deep within. You wander closer to the oven, running a hand over warm bricks, feeling the hair on your arms rise with static and heat. This is where countless meals begin. Meat, grain, root vegetables, thrown together in a single pot because when the blizzard hits, there's no popping out for fresh herbs or anything fancy. The chef here, some grandmother with a twinkle in her eye and zero tolerance for your complaining, gives you a nod that says, "Good, you're here." Stir. Mainstream historical fact? These big Russian masonry stoves date back centuries and were such a core part of rural architecture that entire house designs revolved around them. They could maintain steady heat for hours, which in Siberia is like having central heating before it was cool. You reach for a ladle and sniff the steam: onions, carrots, beets, maybe a fatty hunk of pork. But she bats your hand away. Not yet, she warns, because flavors need time. You try not to sulk. Meanwhile, there's a roaring debate in the corner about which region's bread is best. You hear one villager say that his grandmother's recipe could bend an axe, while another insists you should be able to tear off chunks with one hand. Historians still argue whether Russian peasant breads were primarily functional bricks of calories or vehicles for community identity. Outside, the wind rattles the shutters. You shiver, imagining trudging across the steppe at night. No electricity, no neon signs, just the glow of these little hearts like scattered stars of human stubbornness. In here, you're safe for now. The babushka finally lets you taste the broth, salty, fatty, warming in a way you feel in your bones. You make a face at the pickled cabbage floating in it, and she smirks, because it's better than scurvy, kid. And just when you think you've got it figured out, she opens a side hatch of the stove to slide in a blackened iron pot full of something else entirely. Layers of barley, chunks of meat, a knob of butter the size of your fist. She mutters a little charm under her breath to keep the pot from boiling over, because hey, you never know what spirits might be listening. That fringe tidbit? Well, Russian kitchen folklore was a thing. People believed in domovoi, little house spirits who had to be appeased with offerings of bread or milk lest they hide your spoons or burn your food. You glance around nervously, hoping you didn't offend anyone. You settle onto a wooden bench, clutching your bowl. The walls are lined with dried herbs, cured meats dangling like sleepy bats. Everything about this place says survival, but also welcome. It's both a fortress and a home, a place where strangers might share a meal simply because it's too cold not to. You take another sip of broth. It's simple, but it sticks with you. Like this moment. Like this story. You shift on the wooden bench, the warmth of the stove seeping slowly into your frozen bones, and watch as your host methodically slices black bread. The crust is so hard it could deflect cannon fire, but inside it's dense, moist, and sour in that way only true rye can manage. She saws at it with the patience of someone who knows winter is long and meals are not to be rushed. You sniff it before biting in, an old habit everyone here seems to have. The sourness is deliberate, a gift from the wild lactobacilli that colonized the dough over days. This isn't the airy baguette of Paris or the fluffy white loaves you see at modern supermarkets. It's survival in edible form. Mainstream historical fact: rye bread was a staple for Russian peasants because rye grows in terrible soil and shrugs off coal like it's nothing. In imperial times, it fed the masses when wheat was a luxury crop for the rich. It said Russia ran on rye the way other empires ran on silver or slaves. You chew thoughtfully. It's filling in a way that doesn't invite greed. You get the sense no one overeats here, there's too much winter for that. Besides, bread must last. Even the Tsar's grand kitchens kept careful ledgers of every loaf. Your host's gnarled fingers spread a glistening layer of salted butter over your slice. She hands it over without ceremony. Butter was gold in a world without refrigeration, churned painstakingly and stored in cool cellars, an emblem of wealth even among the poor. Then she points you toward the small pot on the stove's ledge. You lift the lid to see a humble porridge of buckwheat kasha, steam curling lazily like a sleepy cat. It's peppered with small cubes of pork fat that gleam translucent in the firelight. You scoop some onto your bread because that's just how it's done. The smoky saltiness of the fat melts into the sour crumb and the nutty kasha. It's perfect. Or, well, it's perfect when you're half frozen and hungry enough to chew your mittens. Quirky tidbit? Buckwheat isn't even technically a grain. It's a seed, and it made its way to Russia via the Mongol invasions, so yes, you're eating the legacy of a brutal conquest with your buttered bread. Cheers! The babushka watches you with one eyebrow raised, like she's testing you. When you go in for seconds, she finally grunts approval. She sets about preparing the samovar next, a giant brass urn that hisses and wheezes as it heats water. You watch as she carefully adds tea leaves, sometimes a twist of citrus peel if she's feeling fancy, and lets the tannic brew strengthen to something approaching tar. Russians loved their tea so much they'd import it overland on camel caravans from China, paying ridiculous sums for the privilege. You listen to the samovar gurgle, feeling sleepier with every puff of steam. Historians still argue whether samovars originated from Central Asian designs or were entirely homegrown Russian inventions. Either way, they're beautiful, with their polished metal, elegant spouts, and enough capacity to hydrate an entire village of gossiping old women. You try to pour your own cup and nearly scald yourself, earning a cackle from the old cook. She shows you how it's done: a bit of hyper-concentrated tea syrup, topped with boiling water, and always a sugar cube held delicately between your teeth while you sip. The cube melts, sending a trickle of sweetness into the dark bitterness. She laughs at your grimace. Not for children, she mutters, which is ironic since you're fairly sure kids here drank it too. As the wind screams outside, you hear the stories start up. This kitchen is as much a theater as it is a dining room. Tales of wolves pacing just beyond the treeline, of soldiers who vanished into snowdrifts, of harvest festivals that ended in drunken song. You feel the bread in your belly, the tea warming your chest, and you close your eyes. For a moment, you're no longer a visitor. You're just another freezing soul grateful for the miracle of warm bread, butter, and strong tea. You lean back against the wall, feeling the radiating heat of the tiled stove behind you, and watch as your host shuffles to the giant iron pot in the corner. She pries off the heavy lid with a grunt. The aroma hits you like a quilt to the face, rich, meaty, herbal, and just a little sour. Welcome to the land of shkai, the cabbage soup that kept Imperial Russia running. Or at least staggering along through 6 months of darkness. She ladles it out carefully, watching the golden droplets of rendered fat swirl on the surface like tiny oil paintings. Inside, you see cabbage soft as old paper, hunks of beef or pork clinging to bone, and dark rye breadcrumbs floating like doomed ships. Mainstream historical fact: shkai wasn't just common, it was practically mandatory. Imperial army rations included it. Travelers documented entire villages that ate it every single day. Cabbage grows well in short summers, keeps forever once pickled, and transforms into this tart, comforting hug in a bowl. You spoon it up, the broth scalding but irresistible. It's sour, thanks to fermented cabbage, with just enough salt to remind you preservation was life before refrigeration. You might not swoon with joy eating it, but you won't starve either. That's the point. She snorts at your cautious slurping. Eat like you're alive, she says. So you do. Quirky tidbit? In the deep countryside, they sometimes added fish heads or even bear meat if they were lucky, or unlucky, depending on your perspective. Historians still argue whether this was common practice or just local legend. But your host winks as she stirs, suggesting she knows more than she'll tell. You mop the bowl with more black bread, watching her toss in whole peppercorns and dried herbs for the next batch. The smell is almost medicinal. Like a cure for existential dread. She slides over a wooden cup of kvass, the famously mild, slightly fizzy drink made from fermented bread. You sniff it suspiciously, it smells like sour beer's shy cousin. But one sip is oddly refreshing. Barely alcoholic, tangy, and perfect for washing down salty soup. You glance at the heavy barrel by the stove. Kvass production here is serious business. Families would keep vats fermenting through the winter, carefully skimming off the foam and muttering household spells, or so they claimed. Your host insists it's good for you. Keeps the blood from freezing, she says with a grin. You don't argue. A log pops in the stove, sending sparks up the chimney, and you realize how essential this little room is. It's a kitchen, yes, but also a shelter from the dark and the wolves and the impossible cold outside. The walls are thick, windows small and frosted. Every inch is designed to keep warmth in and death out. She shows you the root cellar door in the floor. You peer down at baskets of potatoes, jars of pickles, beets, carrots, and an ominous rack of hanging sausages. That's insurance, she says. Enough food to keep the family alive even if snow seals them in for weeks. You tap the side of your bowl. More? She raises one eyebrow but obliges, ladling another helping of steaming sky, thicker this time because all the good stuff has sunk to the bottom. You burn your tongue and she laughs, teeth like old fence posts. Better too hot than too cold, she says, and you realize that might as well be the motto of this entire frozen empire. You listen to the wind rattling the shutters, the crackle of the stove, and the slow rhythmic bubbling of the soup pot. Outside is a world of snowdrifts tall enough to swallow sledges whole, of ice rivers that creak and groan like whales in pain. Inside? A bowl of cabbage soup and a mug of bread-based soda. It's hard to say which world feels more real. You wipe your lips with the back of your hand, settling deeper into your spot near the stove. The wind shrieks outside like some furious witch denied entry, but you're warm and drowsy now, watching your host trudge over to a great, battered pot she calls the kasha cauldron. Here it comes, the true backbone of Imperial Russia's winter kitchens. Kasha isn't just one dish, it's a whole worldview. Buckwheat, millet, barley, oats, rice if you're fancy. She tosses handfuls of roasted buckwheat groats into the pot, the kernels clicking like tiny stones, then adds milk, salt, and an unapologetic slab of butter that sizzles as it hits the metal. Mainstream historical fact, kasha was served to everyone from peasants to tsars. Peter the Great supposedly insisted on it during campaigns. It's portable, filling, and dirt cheap, which is exactly what you need when your empire stretches from the Baltic to the Pacific and you have to feed an army on the move. Steam billows as she stirs, filling the room with the nutty, earthy smell of buckwheat. You lean over for a better sniff and nearly get smacked with the spoon. Patience, she warns. Quirky tidbit? In some villages, they'd bury the kasha pot in embers overnight so it was ready by morning, a trick that left the bottom layer crusty and smoky. Best part, she says, and taps the pot conspiratorially. Historians still argue whether this technique was universal or just regional, but you're hoping you get the burnt bit. You watch milk foam around the edges, threatening to boil over. She nudges the pot off to a cooler spot on the stovetop. It's an art, managing temperature on these old monsters. There's no dial, just intuition, practice, and an occasional burnt offering to the stove gods. You scrape your spoon along the pot's edge once she's distracted. It's not ready yet, but the taste is there, nutty, creamy, with a whisper of smoke from the stove itself. She eyes you but pretends not to notice. You hear the story of how, on bitter nights, the entire family would sleep in the kitchen to stay warm, the stove's heat lingering in the walls. Children would be bundled like little burritos in wool and fur. Sometimes, if the stove was big enough, they'd sleep on it. You imagine snoring away on a flat clay bed while your host cooks kasha underneath you. Best heated mattress in history. You can see why it was more than just food. Kasha was ritual. Babies got it at weaning. Newlyweds ate it for good luck. Funerals ended with it too, the ultimate cradle-to-grave carb. Your host finally deems it done and scoops you a bowl. She drops a chunk of butter on top so big it should probably come with its own passport. It melts instantly, pooling in the center like golden lava. You take a bite. It's simple. Stubbornly plain. But the butter carries it somewhere else entirely, and you understand, for a moment, how this could be enough. Enough to keep you alive, enough to taste like home even if you're 2,000 versts away marching through the Urals. She watches you eat, smiling like a wolf with a secret. Then she rummages in a crock and produces preserved berries, lingonberries so tart your eyes water. She spoons them on top of your kasha without asking. The pop of acid is exactly what it needs, cutting the buttery richness. You can't help it, you nod in approval. See, she says, satisfied. Not just gruel. The wind howls, but you barely hear it over the sound of your spoon scraping the last bits from the bowl. Your host wipes her hands on her apron and eyes you appraisingly, like she's deciding whether you can handle what comes next. Satisfied, probably because you didn't die of kasha boredom, she rummages in a small, soot-blackened cupboard and pulls out a thick clay pot with a cracked lid. You lean closer as she lifts it, releasing a swirl of rich, fatty aroma that clings to your face like a warm scarf. This is shkai. Cabbage soup may sound humble, but in Imperial Russia it was practically a national institution. Every family had their own guarded recipe, and the word itself became shorthand for sustenance. Mainstream historical fact? Shkai was so vital that soldiers and peasants alike would chant, "Shkai and kasha are our food." Catherine the Great's court loved French cuisine but couldn't quite give up the humble cabbage pot simmering away in the servants' quarters. She ladles you a bowl, the broth cloudy with slow-cooked cabbage, tender beef bones if you're lucky, and a generous slick of sour cream melting on top. The kitchen smells like garlic, bay leaf, and the wet, vegetal sweetness of fermented kraut. You take a careful sip. It's sour, savory, somehow comforting and challenging at the same time, like someone insulted you politely but handed you a blanket immediately after. Your host chuckles at your expression. Quirky tidbit? In winter, they'd freeze blocks of shkai solid, hacking off hunks like culinary ice sculptures to thaw over the stove later. Perfect for sleigh trips or military campaigns. Pre-packaged convenience food, she sniffs. Long before your supermarkets. Historians still argue whether true shkai must be sour. Some claim fresh cabbage sufficed in summer, while others insist only sauerkraut gives the dish its soul. Your host seems to fall firmly in the sour camp, judging by the entire crock of fermented cabbage lurking behind her. She waves her ladle like a scepter, commanding your attention. She reminds you that in a winter kitchen, time is the secret spice. Nothing is rushed. The stove is coaxed, the pot rotated, the lid lifted and replaced like a slow dance. You realize there's a kind of generosity in this pace. It feeds not just the body but the shared hush of family crowded around the stove. You wipe sour cream from your lip as she drapes another log onto the fire, sending a shower of sparks rattling up the chimney. It's hypnotic, this gentle crackle and the weight of food in your belly. Outside, you can practically feel the frost crawling up the windows like a silent siege. But in here, you're safe, a guest in the last place winter can't quite reach. She's already on to the next step, rummaging through burlap sacks of root vegetables. Carrots, parsnips, beets the size of your head. The cutting board thunks dully as she splits them with a well-worn knife. You offer to help, but she shoos you away, muttering something about guests who think they're chefs. You settle back, watching the swirl of steam, the slow rhythm of prep. It's almost meditative. She pauses once, hands on her hips. Your kitchens move too fast, she says, not unkindly. Microwaves. Beep beep beep. You eat, you leave. Here? Food makes you stay. You nod because there's no real argument to make. She gestures for you to finish your bowl. You obey, licking the spoon like a scandal. Good, she says at last, taking your empty dish. Now you're ready for the real work. You shiver, but it's not from the cold.
She sets your empty bowl aside with a clink, then pushes open a low door to reveal a dim pantry. The scent hits you first, cool earth, old wood, the tang of vinegar, and something so sharply salty it tightens your jaw. Pickling is next. You duck to follow her in, your breath puffing white in the chilly air. Shelves sag under the weight of glass jars and ceramic crocks, all sealed tight against the Russian cold. Brine clouds the jars like swamp water, obscuring half-dissolved herbs and glinting coriander seeds. Your host flicks a candle to life. Shadows shudder across rows of dill cucumbers, pickled mushrooms, cabbage fermenting to a shocking neon green. Mainstream historical fact? Imperial Russia's winters were famously brutal, locking the land in frost for half the year. Preserving food wasn't a hobby, it was survival. Even the Tsar's palace needed thousands of barrels of pickled vegetables to keep the kitchen stocked until spring. You run your finger along one of the crocks and it squeaks with salt crust. She snorts at your reaction. Quirky tidbit? They even pickled watermelon. Yes, watermelon. Whole or sliced, shoved into brine with garlic and dill until it turned oddly fizzy and sour-sweet. Don't knock it, she warns, handing you a wedge. It's an acquired taste. Very acquired. You bite. Your face contorts. She howls with laughter. Historians still argue whether pickling spread in Russia from Mongol influence or was an older Slavic tradition refined over centuries of need. She dismisses the debate with a flick of her hand, saying the important thing is it worked. She pulls out a barrel lid with a dramatic flourish, revealing whole heads of cabbage drowning in salty, murky water. The smell is pungent enough to clear your sinuses. You want vitamins in winter? This is it. She spears a chunk and passes it to you like a communion wafer. It's crisp, squeaky between your teeth, shockingly alive. She takes the moment to lecture you gently about the virtues of patience. Nothing about this is fast, no shortcuts, no hasty heat blasts. Just time, salt, and waiting. The candle flickers. She squints at you in the glow, voice softer. You people are always in such a hurry. You forget food's supposed to wait for you sometimes. Outside the small window, frost furs the glass like a delicate veil. You lean closer to the shelves, peering at a row of squat jars stuffed with garlic, carrots, and herbs suspended like grimacing dolls in brine. She grabs your elbow and leads you out, muttering about the cold ruining your complexion. Back in the warm kitchen, you shake off the chill. The fire crackles its welcome, and she hands you a cup of kvass, barely alcoholic, a dark, bready drink brewed from fermented rye. It's oddly comforting to drink what feels like liquid bread. Good for you, she says. Better than all those fizzy sodas. You sip slowly, trying not to grimace at the sour edge. She sets to work chopping more cabbage, humming a tune that sounds older than the walls. Your eyes roam the room. Bundles of dill hang drying. Peppercorns rattle in a jar. A huge pot bubbles on the stove with something too dark to guess. She sighs as she works. Pickling is cheap. Democratic. Everyone gets to eat. You can't argue with that. The fire roars a little louder as she tosses in another log. The room feels even smaller now, walls pressing in with heat, scent, the muffled weight of snow outside. You take another sip of kvass. You'll learn, she promises. If you survive the watermelon. You roll your eyes. She winks back. And so you stay, waiting with her, listening to the wind outside and the patient pop of bubbles in brine. The fire's warmth clings to your skin as she drags a heavy wooden table closer to the hearth. Tonight, she says, you're going to learn about the mighty borscht, the beet soup that's more than just a recipe, it's a winter ritual in these parts. You watch as she unwraps a bundle of fresh beets, their deep crimson skins dusted with earthy residue. The sharp, sweet smell immediately fills the air, promising comfort and nourishment. Borscht, you soon discover, is as layered as a good story. The version in Imperial Russia's winter kitchens often featured smoked meats, sour cream, and a splash of vinegar or lemon juice, a perfect balance to the earthiness of the beets. It's a dish so beloved that even the Tsar himself reportedly had a favorite recipe, though historians still argue whether his version was truly Russian or borrowed from Ukrainian cooks. You lean in, watching her peel and chop with practiced ease. She chuckles softly when you ask if the soup was actually served to the aristocracy every day. Not quite, she says. But even the nobles respected a good bowl of borscht on a freezing night. As the pot simmers, she explains a quirky tidbit: in some regions, people added dried apples or prunes to their borscht to add a surprising hint of sweetness. The juxtaposition of flavors, she says, is like a little winter surprise hiding in your spoon. You try to imagine it, wondering if you'd like it or recoil in confusion. While you wait, she tells you about the communal nature of borscht, how large pots would be shared among families or even whole villages during winter festivities. It's more than food, it's an act of gathering, a moment of warmth in the cold, a ritual to stave off the long, dark nights. She ladles a generous serving into your bowl, the deep ruby liquid steaming gently. The aroma is hypnotic, a mix of earth, smoke, and that faint tang of sour cream waiting to be stirred in. You take a careful sip, the flavors unfolding slowly, a dance of sweet, sour, and smoky that somehow feels like home, even if you've never been here before. She watches you, eyes twinkling. See? Food that makes you want to stay put by the fire. The wind outside howls softly, snowflakes tapping the window like a lullaby. You feel yourself relaxing into the warmth, the rich flavor, and the gentle rhythm of her stories. Historians still debate how much borscht has changed over centuries, but here, in this small kitchen, it's timeless, a quiet comfort against the endless winter. The kettle whistles softly on the stove, its steam curling upward like a lazy ghost. You watch as she pulls out a jar of kvass, the dark, tangy bread-based drink that Russians have sipped for centuries to fight winter's bite. It's not exactly what you'd expect for comfort, but then again, the kitchens here hold many surprises. Kvass is made by fermenting rye bread with water, sugar, and sometimes herbs or berries. It has a fizzy, slightly sour taste, like a distant cousin of beer, but with a gentler buzz. She explains that kvass was a staple for all classes, from peasants to nobles. The drink's humble origins belie its importance. It was believed to help digestion, warm the body, and even ward off scurvy during those long, bleak winters. You take a tentative sip, surprised by the subtle sweetness mingling with a tangy finish. She grins, not your typical winter warmer, but it grows on you. Then she shares a quirky fact. In some parts of Russia, people would freeze kvass into ice pops during the short summer months, a refreshing treat that seems oddly out of place when you think of the relentless cold outside. As you settle into the kitchen's cozy nook, she talks about how kvass was also a social drink, brewed in big barrels and shared among neighbors, sparking conversations that helped pass the dark hours. Historians still argue whether kvass's popularity was more due to its nutritional value or simply because it was a cheap and easy way to add flavor to otherwise bland winter diets. She pours another glass for herself, the amber liquid catching the firelight. You notice how something as simple as fermented bread can become a symbol of survival and community, a reminder that comfort doesn't always come from richness, but from shared experience and tradition. Outside, the wind is a steady drum, but inside, the kitchen feels like a quiet refuge. The soft clink of glasses, the murmur of stories, and the warmth of the drink create a gentle lull. You take another sip, feeling the faint fizz tickle your tongue, a small spark of life amid the cold. She chuckles softly, who knew bread could be so lively? You laugh with her, the sound mingling with the crackle of the fire. You notice the heavy wooden table, scarred and worn from years of use, now laid out with bowls of steaming porridge, grechka, the buckwheat so common in Russian kitchens. It's humble food, but in winter, it's a warm hug in a bowl. She scoops a serving for you, the nutty aroma filling the air, comforting and simple. Grechka was a staple for the Imperial kitchens, especially during the long winters when fresh vegetables were scarce. Buckwheat's resilience made it a reliable crop even in harsh climates. It wasn't just fuel, it was part of a ritual, a way to ground oneself amid the swirling snows. You learned that buckwheat porridge was often enriched with bits of dried mushrooms or meat, adding depth and a subtle earthiness that hinted at the forest's bounty. She tells you about how peasants and nobles alike prized grechka, though the preparation varied widely. The nobility might sweeten it with honey and nuts, while the common folk kept it savory, often flavored with sour cream or onions. You try to imagine eating this simple dish in a grand palace versus a tiny wooden hut, both seeking warmth and comfort through the same humble grain. Here's a quirky twist. In some northern regions, locals would mix buckwheat with fermented fish, an odd combination by modern tastes but beloved as a winter treat. Historians still argue whether this peculiar pairing originated from necessity or a genuinely acquired taste for complexity in flavor. You spoon another bite, letting the grain's soft texture spread warmth through your body. It's plain, yet deeply satisfying, no need for extravagant spices or fancy sauces when the cold outside is sharp and unforgiving. She laughs quietly. You know, if you had to pick one food to survive a Siberian winter, this would be it. You nod, feeling the porridge's quiet strength settle in. Outside, the wind howls a little louder, but here, with the kitchen's warmth and the soothing bite of Gretchka, you feel an odd sense of peace, as if the winter could rage on forever and you'd be safe within this simple, time-tested comfort. The kitchen's fire crackles softly as you watch the cook pull a heavy pot off the stove, revealing steaming bowls of rasolnik, a traditional Russian soup that's surprisingly tangy and deeply satisfying. You lean in, inhaling the sour aroma mingled with earthy barley and tender chunks of pickled cucumber, an odd but inviting combo that warms you from the inside out. Rasolnik was a winter staple in Imperial Russia, especially popular during fasting periods when meat was scarce or forbidden. It's a curious soup, made from the brine of pickled vegetables, usually cucumbers, combined with pearl barley, potatoes, and sometimes kidney or other offal for the adventurous. This soup showcases the resourcefulness of Russian cooks who transformed humble, fermented ingredients into something celebratory. You're told that the soup's slightly sour tang was believed to aid digestion during heavy winter meals. Interestingly, pickling itself was more than just food preservation, it was a survival technique that provided vital vitamins when fresh produce was impossible to come by. Fermentation was everywhere, from sour cabbage to kefir, lending a distinctive tartness to winter diets. A fringe tidbit surfaces as you hear how some Russian nobles supposedly preferred rasolnik so much they'd serve it with tiny croutons and fresh herbs to elevate the humble dish to aristocratic status. Imagine that, the peasant's pickle soup transforming into a court delicacy, one spoonful at a time. Historians still argue whether rasolnik originated as a peasant dish that later trickled up to the aristocracy, or if it was the opposite, a fashionable invention that spread downward, much like modern food trends. Either way, it remains a quietly comforting reminder that even the simplest ingredients can nurture and delight. You take a sip, feeling the cool, tangy broth slowly chase away the winter chill from your bones. There's a gentle satisfaction in its gentle sourness, like a secret handshake between generations who survived bitter cold winters with little more than a pot and some pickles. As you lean back, you realize how food isn't just sustenance here, it's history, memory, and a quiet act of kindness in a world carved from ice and snow. The kitchen now fills with a softer glow as the cook gently unwraps a loaf of black rye bread, its dense crumb dotted with sunflower seeds and a crust that crackles softly when torn. You reach for a thick slice, the faint aroma of molasses and earth rising from its hearty body. This isn't just any bread, it's the bedrock of Russian winter comfort food, the humble but revered rye. Rye bread was the dietary cornerstone for most Russians during the Imperial era, especially in winter when wheat was expensive or scarce. It thrived in the colder, harsher soils where wheat failed, giving rise to a staple with a flavor that's rich, slightly sour, and utterly satisfying. You probably won't survive a Russian winter without it, the locals say, half joking. You notice how every family's recipe varied slightly, some added a pinch of caraway for warmth, others a touch of honey or molasses for subtle sweetness. The bread's dense texture made it perfect for dunking into soups like the rasolnik you just savored, or for spreading with thick slabs of butter, sometimes layered with smoked fish or pickled vegetables. Interestingly, Russian bakers used a sourdough starter known as zakvaska, a tradition dating back centuries and still debated by historians whether it was initially a peasant innovation or imported by trade from the Baltics. The starter's tangy fermentation gave the bread its signature sour note, much like German pumpernickel, but with a uniquely Russian soul. A quirky tidbit floats in: some imperial kitchens reportedly baked rye bread in massive, oven-hot bricks designed to last weeks, providing a survival ration during long, harsh campaigns or remote winter hunts. Imagine carrying a brick of bread through a snowstorm, practical and oddly poetic. As you bite into the rye, its firm crumb gently crumbling against your teeth, you realize it's more than just food. It's the taste of endurance, of rustic resilience baked into every crumb. Historians still debate rye bread's precise origins and how it shaped Russia's social fabric. Did it keep peasants alive or symbolize the divide between nobility and common folk? The answer, like the bread itself, is dense and layered, revealing new flavors with every bite. You feel a quiet warmth settling in as the rye's robust character fills your senses, a perfect, grounding counterpoint to the more delicate flavors swirling around you. The kitchen's smoky warmth hums around you as a pot of kasha gently bubbles on the stove. This humble porridge, made from buckwheat groats, is a classic winter comfort food across Imperial Russia's vast kitchens. You scoop a spoonful, its nutty aroma filling the air, thick and soothing like a warm hug from the past. Kasha was everywhere, at peasant tables and aristocratic feasts alike, although the quality and accompaniments varied widely. The rich might add butter, cream, or mushrooms harvested from the royal forests, while the common folk often ate theirs plain or with a sprinkle of salt. Buckwheat, though not a true wheat, thrived in Russia's cooler climates, making it an essential crop for those brutal winters. You probably won't survive the Russian winter without a steaming bowl of kasha, locals whisper, and you're starting to believe it. Its hearty texture and slow-burning carbs were the perfect fuel for long, cold days spent chopping wood or walking through snow-covered villages. Historians still argue whether kasha's widespread use was due to its availability or a deep cultural preference that became a marker of Russian identity. Some say it was a practical choice, others believe it evolved into a beloved comfort symbol, a culinary thread weaving through centuries of hardship and celebration. Here's a quirky detail: in some imperial kitchens, chefs prepared a sweet version of kasha called tickle, where fruit juices were thickened into a jelly-like dessert served after the main meal. Imagine ending a snowy day with a warm, sweet treat that still feels rustic and wholesome. The tradition of kasha goes deeper, there's even a folk song about it, sung during harvest festivals, praising the grain's ability to sustain families through the harshest seasons. You hum the tune quietly to yourself, imagining snowflakes gently falling outside as you savor each bite. As you feel the comforting warmth spread inside you, you remember the stories of imperial kitchens where kasha wasn't just food but a symbol of perseverance, a soft reminder that even in cold times, simple pleasures endure. You take another spoonful, the taste both grounding and a little mysterious, a reminder that every dish in this winter kitchen has its own layered story, waiting to be slowly savored. The scent of freshly baked rye bread wraps itself around you, warm and inviting, as you find yourself near a bustling imperial kitchen's hearth. Rye bread was the backbone of Russian winter meals, its dense crumb and slightly sour tang perfect for withstanding long storage through cold months. You tear off a crusty piece, the chewy texture and earthy flavor reminding you of the forests and fields beyond the palace walls. In the grand kitchens, bakers worked tirelessly to provide loaves not just for the Tsar's table but for the entire household, from nobles to servants. Rye flour was more common than wheat in the colder regions, and its hearty nature made it ideal for keeping hunger at bay during frosty nights. You probably won't survive the winter on bread alone, but Russians came close, weaving it into almost every meal, paired with butter, cheese, or even smoked fish. The crusts might be hard enough to tap a rhythm on the wooden table. Who knew carbs could double as percussion instruments? Historians still argue whether the sourdough starter traditions in Imperial Russia were influenced more by Eastern neighbors or local innovation. Some say the Slavic tribes shared techniques with the Mongols, while others point to isolated villages where bread-making evolved independently. A quirky tidbit: in some households, leftover rye bread was dried and ground into breadcrumbs or even used as livestock feed during especially harsh winters. Nothing went to waste in the relentless cold, and every crumb had a purpose. There's a fascinating ritual linked to bread in Russian folklore. Breaking bread together symbolized trust and peace, even among enemies. You imagine nobles and peasants, momentarily united by the simple act of sharing a loaf amid the swirling snow outside. As you savor the dense, slightly tangy bread, you feel the texture echo the resilience of a people who faced endless winters with determination and a quietly rebellious appetite for life's small comforts. You remember that kasha from earlier and realize bread was the perfect partner, balancing the soft warmth of porridge with its hearty crunch. Together, they formed a duo that kept Imperial Russians nourished, hopeful, and ready to face another frosty dawn. The kitchen's simmering pots now call you closer to a dish that's both humble and essential: borscht. This vivid beet soup, with its deep crimson hue, warmed imperial tables throughout the winter, a perfect blend of earthiness and subtle sweetness. You dip a spoon in, feeling the warmth flood your hands before the flavors gently unfold: beets, cabbage, a hint of smoky meat, and a dollop of cooling sour cream that softens the bite just enough. Borscht wasn't just a meal, it was a comforting ritual, its recipe shifting from region to region and household to household. The winter kitchens of Imperial Russia saw endless variations, each simmering quietly to chase away the chill outside. You probably won't survive the winter without a pot of borscht bubbling on the stove, but those who did swore by its restorative qualities, rich in vitamins and soul-soothing in its vibrant red glow. Historians still debate the true origin of borscht, some trace it back to Eastern Slavic peasants, while others suggest influences from Polish or even Lithuanian cooks. Regardless, by the 18th century, it had firmly rooted itself in the grand kitchens of the Tsars. A quirky note, some versions included unexpected ingredients like dried mushrooms or even fish broth, showing how flexible this winter staple could be. In fact, the inclusion of certain vegetables often depended on what was preserved during the short summer harvest. In the chilly imperial pantries, where food was stored in earthen cellars, beets were a treasure. Their natural sugars intensified during storage, making borscht a surprisingly sweet counterpoint to the sour cream's tang. You might chuckle picturing noble guests politely dipping into their bowls, unaware that borscht was once peasant fare. It's a bit like a velvet glove over a sturdy iron fist of survival. The soup's rich red color also carried symbolic weight in Russian culture, associated with warmth, health, and even protection from winter's gloom. So, every spoonful was not just nourishment but a tiny act of defiance against the cold. As the steam rises gently, you catch a hint of dill and garlic, simple herbs that transform borscht into something magical. They remind you that even in the coldest winters, small bursts of green and life found their way into the kitchens. And as you sip slowly, the soup's warmth seeps into your bones, promising a cozy rest, wrapped in centuries of winter kitchen stories. Now, as you settle deeper into the warmth of the winter kitchen, your attention drifts to a sweet comfort, pryaniki, those fragrant Russian spice cookies that fill the air with whispers of cinnamon, honey, and cloves. You reach for one, feeling its slightly crisp exterior give way to a soft, chewy center, the sweetness tempered by just a hint of ginger and nutmeg. It's like a cozy hug baked into a bite. Pryaniki were more than just treats. They were tokens of hospitality, often exchanged during the cold months to spread warmth and goodwill. Imperial kitchens produced versions both simple and ornate, some decorated with intricate icing or stamped with folk patterns, while others were plain, perfect for dunking in thick tea. You probably won't survive a Russian winter without a handful of these spice cookies on hand, but those who did were lucky enough to enjoy a small luxury amid the season's austerity. Historians still debate the exact origins of pryaniki, some trace them to ancient trade routes where spices first entered Russia, while others suggest a local evolution of honey cakes enjoyed by Slavic peoples for centuries. A quirky tidbit, in some regions, pryaniki were believed to have medicinal properties, thought to soothe coughs or calm upset stomachs thanks to their warming spices. So, your smack could double as a gentle remedy, a comforting notion when medicine was scarce. The imperial kitchens prized pryaniki for their long shelf life, making them ideal winter staples. Honey's natural preservatives help these cookies stay fresh through long, dark months. You might smile imagining Russian courtiers politely nibbling on pryaniki, their eyes twinkling at the spicy warmth, perhaps exchanging secret smiles over the humble cookie's power to lift spirits. The spices themselves were once precious commodities, brought from faraway lands along the Silk routes, which makes every bite a small journey across continents, a reminder of how connected the world was, even centuries ago. As you savor the subtle heat from the spices, paired with the sweetness of honey, you can almost hear the crackling of the kitchen fire and the quiet murmur of servants preparing the next batch. These cookies, like the winter kitchens themselves, embody a blend of endurance and celebration, a reminder that even the coldest seasons held moments of simple joy. So, as the last crumbs disappear, you feel a little warmer, a little more connected to the hands and hearts of Imperial Russia's winter past. You turn your attention now to a humble yet vital dish that kept many Russians fortified during the long winter months, kasha. This simple porridge, often made from buckwheat, millet, or oats, was a staple of the Imperial kitchen's winter menu, simmering slowly over low flames and filling the kitchen with its hearty, earthy aroma. Imagine yourself stirring a thick pot, the grain swelling with warmth and promise as they absorb the rich broth or milk. Kasha was more than just nourishment, it was a symbol of endurance and comfort. Served plain or dressed up with butter, mushrooms, or even a sprinkle of sugar and dried fruit, it offered a versatile base for 1,000 variations, soothing the cold and filling the stomach with wholesome goodness. You probably won't survive the long Russian winter without a good pot of kasha simmering somewhere nearby, and in the imperial kitchens, it was often made in vast quantities to feed large households and servants alike. Historians still argue whether kasha originated primarily as a peasant food that rose in status or if it was always a respected dish in the royal kitchens. Either way, it held a central place in winter diets across all social classes. A quirky tidbit, in some Russian folk tales, kasha is almost magical, said to bring good luck if you finish your bowl or even to ward off evil spirits. It's fascinating how food can carry such a weight of cultural meaning, beyond mere sustenance. The preparation of kasha in the winter kitchens was a careful ritual, often involving soaking the grains overnight to improve digestibility, then cooking slowly over embers to avoid burning. The kitchen staff would pass down secret tweaks to flavor, from adding a pinch of salt or a splash of cream, to the choice of wood smoke used during cooking. You might chuckle imagining a stern imperial cook guarding the perfect kasha recipe like a royal secret, or servants playfully competing over who could make the fluffiest, most comforting porridge. The grains themselves tell stories of trade and agriculture. Buckwheat, for example, isn't a true cereal grain but a seed, and its cultivation spread through Eastern Europe centuries before the rise of the Russian Empire. As you take an imaginary spoonful of kasha, the texture is smooth and filling, the flavors mild but deeply satisfying, like a warm blanket for your insides. Kasha's enduring appeal reminds you that comfort food doesn't need to be complicated, sometimes the simplest dishes offer the deepest solace during winter's chill. And with that, your senses settle into the slow, rhythmic pace of the imperial kitchen's winter ritual, where every meal is a small act of care and survival. As you linger in the softly lit kitchen, the aroma of smoked fish drifts gently through the air, inviting you to explore another winter comfort, the delicate art of preserving fish for the long months ahead. In Imperial Russia, especially near rivers and the Baltic coast, smoked and salted fish were essential staples, their flavors deepening in cold cellars and ice-covered pantries. Picture yourself watching the kitchen workers skillfully hanging racks of freshly caught whitefish and salmon over slow-burning smoldering wood, the thin wisps of smoke curling lazily upward. This wasn't just practical preservation, it was a culinary tradition woven into winter life, turning simple fish into a richly textured delight that paired perfectly with dark rye bread and mustard. Smoked fish could be enjoyed cold or gently warmed, and its savory saltiness offered a welcome contrast to the sweeter, creamy dishes typical of the season. You probably won't survive the winter without this indispensable protein, and in the grand kitchens of the imperial court, its preparation was an art as much as a necessity. Historians still argue whether the particular woods used for smoking, pine, alder, or birch, imparted distinctive flavors or if it was mostly about availability. Either way, the subtle smoky notes became a hallmark of Russian winter fare. Here's a quirky tidbit: some kitchen folklore claimed that the best smoked fish came from wood gathered only on moonlit nights, a superstition that kept the fish smokehouses lively with whispered tales and gentle ribbing among the cooks. You imagine the kitchen staff, bundled in warm layers, swapping stories while tending the smokehouse, their breath visible in the frosty air as the smoke mingles with the cold. The slow process required patience and care, a sharp contrast to the hectic bustle of other kitchen tasks. Salt curing was another technique frequently used alongside smoking, with barrels of fish pressed beneath heavy weights to extract moisture and intensify flavor. This method could keep fish edible for months, a precious commodity during long winters when fresh catch was scarce. You might chuckle picturing a servant guarding barrels of salt-cured fish as if they were treasures, knowing that one slip could mean a very hungry day ahead. The practice of smoking and curing fish reflects Russia's deep connection to its waterways and the rhythms of nature. Winter was a time of preservation and preparation, a quiet celebration of patience and tradition. The smoky, briny taste lingers in your mind, a reminder that even in the harshest seasons, the imperial kitchen found ways to craft food that was both practical and deeply satisfying. And as the kitchen fires dim to embers, you feel wrapped in the slow warmth of a timeless culinary ritual, where every smoky bite carries the memory of winter evenings long past. Now, you find yourself drawn to the delicate art of brewing Russian kvass, a mildly fermented bread drink that warmed the soul and tickled the tongue during cold winter days. Imagine the large wooden barrel sitting quietly in dim corners of the kitchen, quietly bubbling away as the sweet, sour aroma fills the air. Kvass was a common refreshment for everyone from peasant families to palace residents, prized for its gentle fizz and comforting warmth. This drink was usually made by fermenting rye bread with water, a handful of malt, and sometimes added fruits or herbs. You might be surprised to learn that despite its light alcoholic content, kvass was often consumed by children as well, its gentle buzz barely noticeable but enough to lift spirits during the endless grey winter months. Historians still argue whether kvass originated as a peasant innovation or if it was an imperial favorite adapted from medieval monastic recipes. Either way, the process of brewing kvass was a slow one, requiring days of patient waiting as the wild yeasts worked their magic, turning humble bread into a refreshing elixir. Here's a quirky tidbit: some recipes called for a pinch of honey or dried fruits to add complexity, and rumor had it that the imperial kitchen sometimes added a secret blend of herbs to create a subtle warming effect, though official records remain mysteriously silent on the exact ingredients. You imagine the kitchen maids carefully skimming the kvass barrels, tasting the brew as it matured, exchanging gentle jokes about whose batch would turn out best. It was a quiet joy, a slow ritual embedded in daily life. The drink's low alcohol content made it perfect for sharing at any time of day, especially as a gentle pick-me-up during the long winter evenings spent by the hearth. Kvass was more than just a beverage, it was a social glue and a comforting constant in the winter kitchen's rhythm, a reminder that even the simplest ingredients could be transformed with a little patience and care. And as you sip this imaginary, cool drink in your mind, you feel the gentle fizz spark a quiet cheer, a subtle celebration of the ingenuity hidden in Russia's winter culinary traditions. Now, as you settle deeper into this frosty kitchen world, your thoughts drift toward one of Imperial Russia's coziest winter staples, the humble porridge. Not just any porridge, though, you're entering the realm of kasha, a dish so beloved it could have easily earned a throne of its own. Think thick, creamy grain simmering slowly in a heavy pot, releasing a warm, nutty aroma that wraps around you like a soft woolen blanket. In the grand kitchens, kasha was more than a basic filler, it was comfort food with endless variations, from buckwheat to millet, oats to barley, often enriched with butter, honey, or dried fruits. You picture the kitchen staff patiently stirring the grain, mindful to avoid lumps or scorching, as the winter winds howl outside. There's something oddly soothing about the ritual of preparing kasha, isn't there? Interestingly, historians still argue whether the tradition of kasha traces directly back to the nomadic tribes of the Eurasian steppes or was influenced by Eastern European peasant cooking. Either way, it's a dish steeped in heritage and warmth. The Russian word itself hints at an ancient, shared culinary memory. A quirky fact, some recipes called for adding pine nuts or even small amounts of smoked fish to savory versions, an unexpected twist that might make you raise an eyebrow before returning to your gentle dream state. Imagine that, porridge with a smoky bite, perfect for those chilly mornings when a hint of saltiness stirred the appetite. In those winter kitchens, kasha was also an economical dish, stretching precious grains across many hungry mouths, yet its simplicity belied a surprising versatility. It could be breakfast, lunch, or dinner, and its texture could vary from loose and grainy to smooth and pudding-like. The slow, almost meditative cooking process mirrored the calm, deliberate pace of life inside the palace walls during winter months. You can almost hear the soft clink of spoons against bowls as servants and nobles alike dipped into steaming kasha, sharing quiet moments amid the flurry of court life. Even the Tsar himself likely found solace in this hearty grain, a reminder that beneath the grandeur, everyone needed the simple comfort of a warm meal. As the evening deepens, you feel the warmth of kasha seep into your bones, a gentle reminder that sometimes the oldest dishes carry the most timeless comforts. As the final embers of the imperial winter kitchen glow faintly in your mind, you turn toward the sweet, soft corners of Russian dessert traditions, the winter puddings and baked treats that whispered promises of warmth long after the snow had fallen. You imagine the scent of baked honey cakes, or pryaniki, drifting through frosted windows, their spicy sweetness weaving into the cold air like a comforting lullaby. Imperial kitchens, despite their grandeur, cherished these simple joys, puddings made from dried fruits, honey, and cream, often prepared in large clay pots that held heat for hours, inviting slow, soothing moments amid the bustling palace. You might find a medovic, the layered honey cake whose origins historians still debate. Some say it was a peasant's invention, others insist it came from refined European influences. A peculiar tidbit to tuck into your mental pocket: there was a tradition of soft cheese at desserts, where fresh tvorog, a sort of farmer's cheese, was sweetened with honey or fruit preserves and gently molded into shapes. These were both nourishing and tender, a quiet end to any winter meal, and a reminder of the delicate balance between flavor and comfort. Winter puddings were also practical. They stored well and could be shared easily during long evenings filled with stories and music. You can almost picture the dim candlelight reflecting off the polished wooden tables as guests savored small bites of sweetness, each mouthful a quiet celebration of endurance and hospitality. Remember how you felt the slow rhythm of the kitchens, the careful simmering, the subtle sweetness tucked into every corner? It all comes together here, where the day ends with a soft sigh and the gentle closing of lids on warm pots. So now, as your thoughts begin to drift and the night deepens, let the memory of these winter comfort foods settle like a soft snow on your mind. Let them wrap you in warmth and calm, whispering that even in the coldest times, there is sweetness, care, and quiet joy to be found. Now, dim the lights further if you haven't already, breathe out slowly, and let the peaceful world of Imperial Russia's winter kitchens guide you gently toward sleep.